Hi and welcome. My name's Kit and I'm going to be taking you through a step-by-step guide, just a beginner's guide into making fermented sourdough. This is going to be my version, which is slightly different than you might find, but this is a no knead or a stretch and fold sourdough, which is great because I find kneading dough really messy. I get it all stuck in my arms, all over my hands and all over the work surface. It's really difficult to clean up because it dries like cement. The video is going to be around about half an hour long, and it's going to be just for a beginner to follow through the process. I find sometimes the ones on YouTube are a bit small and you haven't fully seen all of the small parts of how to make bread in detail. So it's going to be broken up into small sections, and you can skip through bits if you want to skip through bits, or if you're new, you might just want to watch the whole thing. It's going to be broken up into a mixing section, feeding of the starter. We're going to have 4 stretch and folds, and then there's going to be a little rundown on some equipment that you can use to improvise, or that I've used to improvise, because we're not all ready to commit and buy expensive Dutch ovens and bannetons, etc. And you don't need to be honest. So there's plenty of ways around things. And then there's going to be a final proving section, and then there's going to be a baking section. And then the eating, which is the best bit. So, the recipe. My recipe is 500 of flour, 300 water, 200 starter, and 9 grams of salt. And I also use sesame seeds on top of the bread, because if you haven't had sourdough with sesame seeds, you've not lived. So, I'm using 350 of white strong flour and 150 of wholemeal flour. So with the starter, if you don't have a starter, it's really easy to make. It's literally just fermented flour and water, and all you do is you mix flour and water together, put it on the work surface, leave it overnight, covered, and then feed it again, give it a bit more flour, a bit more water, and you do this for about a week, and then it will start bubbling up. And once it starts bubbling, that's it fermenting. But it's much easier if you know someone or a friend of yours who's making their sourdough. You could just take a bit of theirs and then maybe just watch my feeding section, and it's basically the same thing. So without further ado and without any more rambling by me, let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to mix our flour into our bowl with our salt. Now I do this because I want to get the salt incorporated into the flour as much as possible and spread throughout the flour as possible, because salt and starter are not best friends. So salt will kill the starter and stop it from working so much. So the more you can mix it into the flour, the better. Now I've already measured out my 200 ml of starter, and what I'm going to do now is, a lot of people just put their starter into the flour, but I like to mix mine into my water. So I take 200 ml of water and 200 ml of starter and I mix them together, and I find that just helps incorporate the starter into the flour a lot easier. I find it much easier to get it right the way through the flour and evenly distributed as much as possible. Right, so once that's incorporated, mixed in, I'm going to start slowly mixing in small quantities into the flour. Not too anal about it. I just like to get it incorporated throughout as much as possible. So I'll just do it bit by bit. Now I use the back of the wooden spoon because I just find it easier to get it through the flour. Spoon, and then I'm going to just mix in the other 100 ml into my jug, and this will help clean the jug, clean the spoon. Right. I'll mix that in at the end. Just mix all of this up now, and you'll see it quite quickly starts coming together. I like to cut through it and then stir and cut through. Now you can see it's all starting to come together, it's a bit flaky. And when I start putting this in, it'll all start coming together then. Right. So now it's starting to come together into one big ball. And it'll all start coming off the sides. So you can see how easy this is to get to bind together. This in itself can be quite difficult sometimes, so that's one of my biggest tips, is how you can kind of incorporate the starter into the flour ball as much as possible. Now one of the major points about making bread is to develop the gluten, and the gluten is what makes it stretchy. So all I'm going to do now is, this is where most people will take this out and start kneading it on the work surface. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you how not stretchy it is. So at the moment it just breaks apart. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that for about 30 minutes, just covered with a cloth. I'm just going to cover it over with a cloth, and I'm not going to touch it for 30 minutes. And then when I come back, you'll see that that dough ball will have changed. It will become stretchy. So the gluten will already work itself. All you've got to do is give it some time. And I'll come back in 30 minutes and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. So, as I said, I was going to guide you through my process. Now, this is still resting. This will be just sat here for 30 minutes, but in that 30-minute period of time, I have to also feed my starter, which is now, well, almost empty. I need to feed it so that it can grow for next week. What I'm going to do is just, I don't measure anything, like I literally just do it by feel. I just put in an amount of flour that I think is right until it comes up to the point where I'm used to it being in my jar, which is usually around about sort of this sort of area. So let me just put some flour in. I know a lot of people say you shouldn't use metal, but to be honest, I mean, it's just easier and it's never had any problems with me. So I just mix in some flour and water. I use the back of the spoon because it's easier. What I do then, I clean off my spoon with one side. And now if I was at the sink I would use the tap, but I just use wet fingers and I just clean my jar, because I don't like crusty, it's not good to leave crusty flour on the side of your jar. So all I do is I clean it up. If I was doing it, if I wasn't doing this on a video, I would do this a lot cleaner, but I'm just going to quickly show you how to do it. I just clean around the edges and then I put the lid on loosely, just loosely, put the lid on, and then I stick it in the fridge. And that will stay in the fridge until next week, and when I come to make my bread next week, I just take it out and I start making the bread. There's no waiting for an hour, waiting for it to come to room temperature. I literally just take it out of the fridge and then I make dough straight away. And I'm sure there are other ways of making it, but this is how I make it, and it's worked for me, so hopefully it'll work for you too. Okay, so it's been about half an hour since I've left this covered after the first mix together. Now, just from leaving this in the bowl without doing anything to it, you can see it's already become stretchy. It's not perfect yet, but it has already started to become stretchy. So the gluten is already building. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'll just grab a bowl of water. Normally I'll just wet my hands, but bowl of water. All I do is have a wet hand. I scoop underneath the bowl. Just move this out of the way. Just scoop this underneath the bowl and underneath the dough, and then I just turn it over. And all I'm going to do then is I'm just going to pull up and then across. Pull up and then across. This is the first fold. We'll probably do about 3 or 4 of these over the next 3 hours, alright, or the next 2 hours. Fold in. And then as you'll see, as you move it faster, it becomes less sticky. so it becomes less sticky to the bowl and you can move it a lot easier. Now, from just having left it and then put it in the bowl, you can see that it's already come together as a nice dough ball. I've already got some gluten over the top, and this will become, you know, more glutinous and more stretchy over time. All I'm going to do is leave that there. I'll just tuck it in and then I cover it up, and we'll come back in another 30 minutes and then we'll do the next fold. Okay, so we've made it to the second fold. Let me just have a look, see what it looks like. It's been about 30 minutes. Hasn't been exactly 30 minutes, but like I say, it's not an exact science. It's just an amount of time that you wait before you do the next fold. As you pull in, what you're doing is you're also stretching this gluten over the top, and I will turn this over. So this is the top, and as I get it released from the bowl, I'm just going to pick it up and turn it over, and then I'm going to pick it up and start my stretch and folds. Now remember, the faster you work, the less it will stick to the bowl, and when it sticks to the bowl, you will tear the gluten over the top, so you don't really want it to stick. So it's just good to move the dough as fast as possible, and then get it released from the bowl and turn it over, and then all you've got then is a nice second fold completed, and it's starting to get a little bit more stretchy along the top, and that's it. In 30 minutes I'll come back for fold 3. Okay, welcome back. This is the third fold. So like I said, it would do, it is sunk down a bit, and we're just going to repeat what we did before. Right. So as you can see, it's only about 1.5 minutes every time we do this fold, so it's really not a problem to fit into your day. And like I say, it doesn't have to be every half an hour. Sometimes it's half an hour, sometimes it's 40 minutes. I've got to be honest, and I have done it every hour before and it still worked. Yeah, and it's fine. You just got to try and work the gluten, but gluten seems to work on its own quite happily. You don't need to keep stretching it all the time. It seems to work all the time on its own. So I've now taken that into a ball. I can already feel air bubbles starting to appear. I don't know if you can see this one here. It's just starting to appear here. I don't want any air bubbles just yet. And I'll just put it back in the bowl. A quick tuck underneath like I do before. I'll cover it over again. It's starting to get quite springy now, so I'll cover it over again and I'll be back in about 30 minutes. Okay, so we're back for the fourth fold. We'll just take the cloth off. Let's have a look. Right, so I'm just going to wet my hands. Just going to turn it over. So scoop underneath, turn it over, and we can start seeing some air bubbles starting to form along the top of the surface. So turn that over. We're going to start the standard process of putting into the middle, turning quite quickly so that it doesn't stick, but it shouldn't. Then we're going to turn it over, and then we're ready. So now you can see bubbles starting to appear here, for example, and I can really feel how like there's a lot of air inside this already. I'm just going to put it back in the bowl and cover it up. And when I come back, I'm going to do the final prove, which will be 3 hours of proving, and then it will go into cook. Okay, so like everything in the world, there are multiple ways to do the next bit. You know, there's no right or wrong way of doing. All we're doing is we're going to try and prove our bread, and then we're going to cook our bread, however we do that. Now, a lot of people don't have all of the utensils and tools that these professional bread makers have. So there are a couple of items you can use. One of them is a banneton like this that you can rise your bread in, and then you would then cook it in maybe a Dutch oven. But if you don't have a Dutch oven, which I don't, I'm going to cook mine into this baking tray. and all I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it with tin. I'm going to prove it in this banneting upside down, and then I'm going to turn it up, turn it out into this, and then I'm going to cover it with tin foil, and then I'm going to cook it. The other way of doing it is to prove it in something like a frying pan with a metal handle, and you can just flour the frying pan, and then you can just put the bread in with the top on top, rather than the opposite way round to this, where the top is underneath, the top will be on top, and then you just prove it in the frying pan. This is a very easy way of doing it. Prove it in the frying pan, cover it, and stick the whole frying pan in the oven, and that will cook just fine. This is how I used to do it for years, until my sister-in-law kindly gave me this for Christmas, which was epic. So I'm probably going to do 2 videos. I'm going to do one video where the end is going to be cooked in this one, and one video where the end is going to be cooked in the frying pan. So I will start the prove next. Right, so for this phase what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the proving of the dough. So this is what the dough looks like at the moment. It's definitely bulked up quite a lot, and I'm going to be putting it into my banneting. So what we're going to do is we're going to just flour the banneting. This has like one of these cloths inside. Sometimes these tins are just made out of bamboo, and you just got to get some good flour into there to stop the the dough from sticking. Now the flour I use here isn't the same as my bread flour. This is actually rice flour, or it can also be gluten-free flour. The reason is because it doesn't seem to react in the same way. If I was to use normal flour and put my bread inside this, I've had it stick and it's gone really messy. So I find rice flour is much better for this part of the process. One side over here. Let's get rid of this. Scoop underneath. Now because I'm doing something that's elongated, I'm not going to scoop around. I'm just going to scoop into like an elongated shape. Just going to into like a rectangle, something similar to what the tin looks like. You can see the big bubble here, which has appeared. This thing. We need to get rid of those, so just pat them down. You don't want these massive bubbles right on the surface. What you'll find with this bread, or the way I'm making it, is that the crumb will be quite tight. It won't be dense, but there'll be millions of little holes rather than not very many large holes. Right, so I'm just going to do, I've sort of knocked a little bit of the air out of this by shaping it. And what I'm going to do now, because I want to put sesame seeds on top, I'm just going to, with the brush, just brush on some water. It will help the sesame seeds stick to the top. And I'm going to be quite liberal with my sesame seeds because I absolutely think it is the best thing to have a really good coating of sesame seeds. It's just unbeatable. So with my sesame seeds, I'm just going to sprinkle over the top. I do this in the bowl to keep it from getting messy. And like I said, I put a lot of sesame seeds on, because why not? If you like them, you like them. You can quite happily skip this bit. Right, now as I pull underneath, those sesame seeds are going underneath. Now what I'm going to do is a little somersault trick. I want this top to be inside here. So I'm going to flip it. I'm going to flip it from here, and then I'm going to turn it into the tray. I'm going to pick it up out of my bowl, and one, and then it goes. So now that it's inside my tray, like this, and there's loads of tiny little bubbles on the top you can see. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull the top, which is underneath, around to the bottom, which is on the top. And then I'm going to stitch it up. Now I could leave it like this and it will be fine, I could just cover it over, but I actually find this makes the top quite tight, so I do this technique where I pull over the top like this, and the front like that, and then I just keep pulling it in, pulling it around like this. Doesn't like like to stick sometimes, so you can kind of just pinch a little bit and it will eventually stick. I know this seems a little bit weird, you don't see people doing this with their bread, but I do it all the time and it works fine. It means I get a little bit more sesame seeds along the bottom and around the edges, and I just get a tighter gluten layer on the top. Just do this, and then you just stitch it up. Now I can pull this in, I can move this around inside this thing, it's not stuck at all, and this is kind of where we are at the moment. It is kind of level with the top of the tray, you can see, kind of level with the top. This bit's a bit puffy, knock it down a bit, it's got 3 hours to grow. So all I'm going to do now, it should probably rise up to about here. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it covered. You could use some sort of bag over the top which will keep the moisture inside. I don't have one, so this will be fine. And then all I'm going to do is leave that for 3 hours, and then we'll start cooking it. Okay, so the bread has been proving now for 3 hours, so if I just take it off and have a look, you'll see that it has risen out of the basket, and it's kind of, you can see if I press it, it kind of pushes back a little bit and then comes back slowly, which is kind of what you want. Now my oven is preheating to 250, which is as hot as I can make it, and now we're ready to put it in the oven. So I just want to explain my tray. So because I don't have a Dutch oven, I've got to kind of make a Dutch oven, which was basically to create a steam box. Basically, I've got this Pyrex dish. This is basically a wall to shrink the Pyrex dish. This is the kind of things you can do at home with whatever you've got, because sometimes you don't have the right things to make bread with. This is an example of something I used to bake bread in, but again it's not big enough for my bread, so eventually I'll have a Dutch oven. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and put it in here. I'm just going to use a bit of baking parchment, and I'm going to cup it over the top, and then I'm going to just grab it on both sides, and then I'm going to slowly turn it over, and then I'm just going to let it fall out, but gently. So now this is risen really nicely. Now I'm going to take this and put it in. Take this and put it in slowly. Alright, so this is risen quite a lot, which is nice. Now I'm going to just take my razor blade. We've got to make some cuts. Just be really careful with the razor blade. You want to make some deep cuts in this. So I'm just going to take the razor blade and score straight across the top. Now I know you're supposed to just do one sweep, but I like to do a couple, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'll just get through here without cutting myself. I like to do a couple of different cuts because I like it to split open, and then the other cuts to have different bits that stick out and get burnt a bit more, or a bit more cooked. I like the little gnarly bits. Yeah, I think that's enough. Right, so put the razor blade away. Now all we're going to do now is get my kettle. I fill just a little bit of water into these little pots because I have them. They'll create a bit of steam inside my tin foil. And I'm also going to fill my baking tray with water. Be careful, keep an oven glove, because that steam properly burns your hands. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cover this tin foil. Now again, I'm not being too fussy about this. I've used this tin foil about maybe 15 times. And all I'm trying to do is create somewhere where the water can, where the steam can stay inside, and that's great. So I'm just going to take this to the oven, open up gently, and then in it goes. Now after about 20-25 minutes, I'm going to turn down the oven, take off the tin foil, remove the baking tray, and then I'm just going to, because my oven heats up faster at the back, I'm going to turn my bread around, and then after that another 25 minutes and it's ready to eat. Okay, so welcome back. I hope that was a successful bake if you followed along, and now it's coming out of the oven. I have left it for about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's nice and cooled down a bit. There's still a bit of warmth on the inside, but it's cooler now. So I'm just going to take the end off. I like to chuck a big chunk off the end, which will be my doorstop, and that will basically keep bread fresh as much as possible. And this is the kind of grain that I expect to have, or the the air pockets. I don't know if you can see that better over there. I'm just going to chop off a nice chunk. And like I said before, I really don't like, well, I'm not a big fan. I mean, it's not like you can't like sourdough, but I prefer to have bread with some texture to it, and holes that I can cover with butter. So obviously the proof is within the eating, so I'm just going to have a quick bite. You get a really good, with sourdough, you get a really good texture, so it's quite strong. Yeah, let's have a go. I mean, it's just epic. So I mean, every single time I make a bit of bread, I'm amazed by it. Just amazed that we can just create bread out of flour and water, with no extra additives. Now, what I do, just to keep this fresh as long as possible, I have this beeswax wrap, which I find really useful and keeps the bread as moist as possible for as long as possible. Now I know that people have, if you're vegan, you won't use this, but there is alternatives, I'm sure. But the beeswax wrap, rather than cling film and having loads of plastic everywhere, I like to just use the beeswax wrap, and that's really good. And then I just stick it in a bag. Job done. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was useful. If it was useful, maybe you found some tips that were different than the way you do it, if you're an experienced bread maker. Yeah, and hopefully you give me a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. It's my first ever video, so I'm quite pleased. And I'll see you if I make another one.